So welcome to the You Are the Creatrix podcast with myself, Angie Litvinoff, and my wonderful guest, Isla Macleod, as part of the belonging season. So Isla is a ceremonialist, something very close to my heart, as you know, a ritual designer and a companion at thresholds, and dedicated to restoring the sacred and inspiring a loving, reciprocal relationship with the natural world. Isla curates healing journeys and soul crafting ceremonies that help activate pathways of remembrance and belonging. Her book, Rituals for Life, is a guide for those seeking more magic, meaning, and connection to the honoring of life transitions and thresholds. So it's with real heart-led love and warmth that I welcome you, Isla. It's been like a long time coming, this connection. I'm just so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Angie. It's lovely to be here. As you say, it has felt like a long time. We've been weaving around one another, so it's good to be in real
Yeah,
time.
wonderful. So so tell us, I know this is a big question, but whatever way you want to answer it, tell us about your life. Tell us about you.
Mm. Okay, well, in the present life that I'm inhabiting, I live in Somerset in a little town called Bruton, where I live with my son Ren. And my days of work are dedicated to supporting other people in creating a life that is more soulful, more meaningful, and in relationship with the natural world and our seasons that we go through, both in the natural world but also within our own lives, of how to mark those times with ceremony, with ritual, in community, being able to tap back into those ways of honoring life, of being able to step back from the treadmill that we're so often on, to be able to reflect, take stock, give thanks, and direct our arrow where we want to move forwards in life. And at the moment, it feels like there's so much shifting. The ground feels like it's just not solid. There's so much that we can't see going forward. So there's a lot of a need at the moment to be shedding this old skin, this old way of how we've been operating in the world, the systems that we are a part of. And it feels like ceremony and ritual can be a doorway or a path for us that are seeking to create the new world that we long for in a way that is in relationship with the more than human worlds, of really acknowledging the full potential that we have as human beings and these original instructions that we came here with of how to be guardians of the earth and creating more beauty in the world. So in any way that people need support in that, and sometimes that's supporting them in creating a spiritual practice or starting to see more through the animist lens of recognizing the aliveness and the interconnectedness of life. So my days can look quite varied with my work, and my playtime is usually out with the trees or wild swimming, enjoying time with my son, and just really attending to that thread of how to show up in a way that is really honoring of this gift of life. And for me, that involves really wanting to celebrate beauty, to make sure that I'm honoring and offering my gifts as much as possible, to stand up for what I hold sacred, and make sure that I'm in some way being a guardian for the earth for the future generations. So that's a little bit about me at this time.
So you first of all spoke about the actual ceremony as opportunity to what, although these are not your words, for what I got from that was like about the standing, the pause, to actually stopping to really come to a grounded space of realization and being in the present moment. And then you talk about that portal or gateway to that connection that we build to. That's very much about movements, because we're going through into those transitions and transformations through the intentional act of ceremony.
Mm.
um, so that's interesting, because it's like, it's the standing still of, and then there's also the movement that comes with that, and then the connection that, bringing meaning into our daily lives, and allowing us to really savor those sacred moments and that connection with nature that you embody. you embody in your everyday experience. That keeps you kind of grounded, and also keeps you aware of that constant interconnectedness of all things that you share with people. And then also your work, sort of, depending on, it sounds very bespoke, so depending on what the person needs. Sounds fascinating. What about your own journey? Because I know you're also an activist, and sort of, what about your own journey? And what, sometimes, sort of, people listening as well will be like, well, how did these women actually get to arrive at this point? How did it happen? So could you tell us a little bit about that, about your own personal journey, about what's led you to this point in your life and what it means to you?
Yes, I felt from a very young age that I was holding big questions about why I'm here and what it's all about. From a very young age, I do remember always wanting to know more about what this life was for. And there weren't the elders, I wasn't part of any sort of religious tradition to sort of ask those kinds of existential questions too. So it was sort of something from very young that I was trying to explore, and having some amazing experiences growing up in very different cultures, sometime in Nigeria and sometimes in Japan, really fed this inspiration of how it could be to live in a world where we were honoring this life, how we could show up and revere those who had come before, and honoring our ancestors, but also really taking care to leave a world that is worthy of our generations yet to come, that it's really going to be a place that we can bestow with love and care, and knowing that we did the best that we could in our short lives. So I had that from very young, and ritual sort of started to be a means for me to explore those bigger questions and also make more sense of my inner landscape and emotions. So from quite young, I seeded this idea that ceremony and ritual offered me a bridge to the spiritual worlds, to also making deeper connection with myself, and in some way tapping into this bigger landscape of reality that wasn't just the sort of physical and everyday that I was participating in. So I was always quite fascinated by the esoteric and the sort of more mystical realms. But then through adolescence, lost my connection with that and lost my way, and ended up sort of coming out of university really depressed and disillusioned with what was being presented as the next phase of my life. And thankfully, I started to practice meditation, and that led me to working and living at a retreat centre in Devon, which was a real time of shedding and unraveling and coming home to myself, coming home to this land, and feeling like that there was a path for me that I was going to need to create, that there hadn't been someone that had walked this way before, certainly not that was sort of still alive. So I had to forge a path, and in doing so met some amazing angels along the way that guided me in a certain direction, and had some remarkable teachers as well. But eventually it was the natural world that called, to be able to really become an apprentice to what felt like me, the source. Like, there weren't the elders, I didn't have the lineages to draw from those traditions, but I could go directly to the natural world. So I moved to some woodland in Sussex, and spent 2 years there in beautiful solitude in these woods, and being in everyday relationship with the trees and the owls, all the different beings that lived there. And that was a really strong turning point for me, of feeling like I had a craft that was emerging of how to honor the cycles particularly. And in doing that, this sense of a rewiring of how I understood reality to be, and what in our culture we're told reality is. And I think that just burst open this sort of bubble that I'd been living in, and seeing that there was a whole other way of seeing the world and being in relationship with others, that spoke to me much more on a soul level than anything that I had been taught at, in education. So that was when it sort of began, that there was an opportunity to start supporting people through ceremony, and particularly with the natural rhythms. I would hold ceremony around the wheel of the year, and offering journeys with trees, and then had a son, so that sort of was my focus for a few years. And when he started school, it became a prayer that I would be able to offer this work as my life's work, and be able to make it some kind of viable business, which has been quite an interesting tension. As I'm sure you'll know, working in these realms, to make it a business does come with some interesting questions. And so I find myself here.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, we have children of similar ages. Actually, I've noted. So, I think also being a mother, and a conscious parent in that way. And I mean, I only know this because this has been pointed out to me. That actually that sort of parenting is quite different at times to parenting people experience elsewhere. And at the same time, um, birthing this new level of working with people that you describe, and making it viable. Um, and also about the resurgence of ceremony. But I have to say that from where I stand, and I think may possibly for you, I don't know, you tell me, it's also about trying to separate out. There's a lot of excitement, trying to separate out what really speaks to the soul. There's a lot of a lot of people taking up the position of space holder. But
Mm.
when your space is held by somebody who deeply feels it in every cell, it is an entirely different thing to somebody who's just come in. And I'm not saying that that's not good for some people, but it's just that level of connection and authenticity for me, is also an education about conveying kind of like, well, what is the substance,
Mm.
of the message. So in terms of belonging, you've spoken about ancestors, and you've also spoken about there was no sort of actual lineage immediately, but I'm also very aware that you have a very deep connection with the land,
Mm.
and that in some ways the connection to your ancestors is actually, it's almost like you kind of like jumped and done that, and then landed in this place of kind of ancient connection,
Mm.
where you are really relating to that. You may want to talk about that, or what your relationship to belonging. What does belonging mean to you personally?
Mm. Well, I think to speak to that sense of having ancestors that are more than human, that for me was the way of discovering my belonging, because I couldn't really connect with my human ancestors at first. And it felt like the trees were offering a reflection of our human potential in a way that sort of bypassed some of the challenges that we might have when we're looking at our more direct human ancestors. But naturally, through devoting myself as an apprentice to the trees, then I was led to the mycelium, and through that became very devoted to connecting more with my human ancestors. And so began pilgrimaging to some of the lands where I know they lived. And the Isle of Lewis is my paternal lineage, come from there, and Kent and Pembrokeshire. So visiting these places that I knew was tended by those who came before me really activated a deeper sense of my belonging to this land. Having, as I said, travelled a lot in my childhood, I felt quite unrooted, and I didn't really have a sense of place. But I think also what that enabled me to appreciate of having had that experience was that even though we might not have that kind of ongoing connection with a particular landscape because we've travel increasingly through generations, that there is a way of us relating with place wherever we might be on this earth, and knowing that we belong. And for me, what that has revealed is the way that the elements can be the keys for that kind of remembrance, in really learning and seeing and knowing the ways that our body is made of earth, that we will return to the earth when we die and become compost for the future, that we have the waters that are in our blood that have cycled round many times, holding all the memory of the life cycles in our blood, in our being, that rhythm that's constantly pulsing and calling us to life. and that we're breathing constantly in communion with the trees and the waters as we draw in breath and as we give back, that there's something of a ongoing reciprocity that we have as we're sharing our breath, and that breaks down any barriers, that we have this sense of a separate self. And then the fire, the warmth within that we feel, that whether that's kind of that burning desire, our longing, our almost that kind of passion for life, but also that connecting us with the sun and the stars, that we have come from that place and have all of that wisdom of creation within our physical bodies. And that for me has been something that's supported me when I haven't been able to live, like I haven't lived off grid now for 5 years, and moving into an apartment and having a very different relationship with the land meant that I really needed to find ways of ensuring that connection stayed really intact and present with me, so that I didn't start to feel more of that disconnection, which I struggled with when I was younger. And I think with belonging, we're a bit too tentative these days because we don't want to step on other people's toes, particularly around the idea of being Indigenous. But for me, we are all Indigenous to this earth, and we all carry, within our DNA, all of the memory of those who have walked this earth. And for so many generations prior to the more recent history, our ancestors were living in an animate relationship with all beings, that they saw the sentience of all life and were able to ensure they were in right relationship. So that memory is actually really readily accessible when we just clear or sort of lift the veil of the recent history of our times, to be able to connect with that sense of belonging so deeply that it bypasses all the stories of who we think we are, to actually just come back to that ancient knowing that we are nature, that we are a force of nature. So that's what I'd like to connect in with. And also with clients, I feel like I've been naturally drawn away from working more directly with their human ancestors to being able to connect more into that sense of the depth of their belonging.
So you're describing a very a deeply immersive process in terms of identity, because that sense of like the assumption that we begin with, that we're conditioned to relate to in terms of who we are. I mean, I'm an immigrant, from Latin America, and my heritage is like about 20 different places on this planet. But what I have found is, having come here, and you describing about the immersion that we have with the elements, is I describe it as like the grit in our food. And once we, you eat local, that is in you, and so then we connect to that land. And for me, it's been an adopted home, which I feel a very strong connection and relationship to and with, as a living relationship. And so I really love, I really love it, what you're saying. And however, like that process that you're taking us through in terms of how you describe it is also about the universal way that everyone has access, regardless, or, as well as everything else that they may relate to. And the conclusion, about identity, which is a very unique, place where we all land, where actually we can form our own. We can actually land where we want to be. And the honoring of other cultures, it's like, I think that's a really active process, isn't it? Because it's like, yeah, we borrow, and we, but it's like, I think, when you honor in some shape or form and give tribute to and acknowledge, then actually the tools that we can share become this wealth of support, which is very different from kind of like stealing, and saying, right, I'm not going to acknowledge where this has come from. It's much more, it's an entirely different way of thinking and being. Yeah, and that belonging is very, very close to your identity. And in terms of your own identity, and your growing identity, as you come into your kind of like embody your wise and wild woman, where would you describe, how would you describe yourself? Although we've had a lovely introduction to you, but in terms of essentially, how do you see your own identity?
Mm. Well, something that I've been reflecting on a lot that speaks a little bit to that sense of where for so long our lens collectively, our sort of way of seeing, has been through this idea that we are separate. And so the fixation on a lot of like where we are not indigenous or that we are borrowing from different traditions, there's often an emphasis on how we are different and that we are apart. And that's just one narrative and it hasn't served us very well. So I really get curious about how it is to see through the lens of wholeness, of oneness, and in that enabling this fullness of expression. So instead of being limited by this is my cultural inheritance, or I mean, as well as that, it's very enriching, not to say that that's just limiting, but that we have narrowed our potential as humans into to sort of particular, almost like boxes and identities. And I know that I've always struggled with labels of any sort, whether that was sort of working related or just being identified as something, because I know myself to be constantly transforming and evolving. Um, but there are, particular threads that I know speak to me at different times, and I certainly think when I was really exploring my human ancestry, that I really started to feel this sort of sense of being of these lands as a sort of Celtic, for want of a better word, but sort of a native to these lands in some level, that I hadn't felt that kind of longevity in terms of relationship with place before. But increasingly, there's a sense of being a child, a daughter of Earth. I mean, that's something which just encompasses for me this whole breadth of what the potential is. I'm a force of nature. Um, I think that there's a few words in terms of like work that I've been trying on to see if they fit, but the idea of a medicine woman, somebody who is there to tend to the needs of the tribe, who usually is a sort of bridge to the other realms, that works in ways that for a long time have actually been punished because they were deemed to be dangerous to the status quo. Um, and then there's, I think there's more mystical things, well, the mystic and the bard and other more creative passions that I have that I know are another part of my identity, as well as being a mother and a sister and a daughter. So it's very multifaceted. When I think of identity, I almost see a diamond, and that depending on the light that day, it can be a different face that's revealing itself in a different kind of rainbow refraction that I almost don't know who I'm going to meet each morning. And that for me keeps it really alive, because I haven't narrowed myself into a box of who I think I am. Although there are some identities that, are very deeply rooted, there's always this want to be playful with that, of like, who could I be? Like, what's the longing? What's my soul seeking to express and emerge today in this moment? And if there's an edge sometimes in that, that's usually where I know I need to go for the deeper realizations and sort of transformation, that there's places that feel scary and invitations that maybe make my heart thump, in nervousness, but that's usually because it's an opportunity to see a side of myself I haven't seen before. um, yes, so that's a kind of winding journey around where I feel my identity lands, which is nowhere and are constantly shifting.
Yeah, and I'm nodding away here. And it's that, that sense of also that changing woman, you
Mm,
know, which I mean, I hear you. It's yeah. I've just got one more question for you. And you have partly answered it already, but I would just love to know if you want to elaborate or expand on anything about your soul and
mm,
passion, and
mm,
how that relates to who you are. Soul and passion, what do they mean to you?
mm. For me, if I'm at the end of my days meeting the threshold of death and can look back and honestly say that I listened to the song of my soul and shared that song with the world, that for me is a fulfilled life. That there is something of an individual and collective soul that we are vessels to bring to life in some way. And it might feel like that is taking us away from certainly the conventional, the predictable, the safe paths in life. but that's where the juice is, that's where the creative potential is, the beauty can emerge, that when we're able to give some form to this uh, aliveness, this sort of impulse to live and create that comes through this depth of soulfulness, when we really show up in a way that is open and willing mm, to see, taste, feel, and become the fullness of who we are, then the soul for me is this vehicle or vessel for that to be, so that we can bring online our full potential when we are resonating with and uh, in collaboration with this song of our soul that we all have, and no one doesn't come with that in this world, that we all have this gift that we're here to bring, and that for me is intrinsically linked with our soul. And I think when we come into that kind of intentionality with our life, that we really feel that we want to live a soulful life that is meaningful, that is um, beautiful, and that is in some way giving thanks for this opportunity and gift of being alive, then the passion naturally is spurred on for us to want to show up more fully. We find the courage that we might not otherwise. We feel the fire, the energy that we need to stay up late at night, even when we're tired, because we're so excited about wanting to finish this creative project. The passion and soul, they're relating with one another by feeding each other this energy of, bringing in together, bringing into alignment what is our natural creative impulse as humans. And I think the passion at the moment for so many of us is sort of like, what do we hold sacred? What is it that excites us, that brings us joy, that gets us turned on essentially just to life? And finding where that passion is, feeling that fire, is then an invitation for us to find the ways that stoke that fire. What is it that brings us into a sense of feeling alive and in relationship and heart opened with gratitude? That it's sort of it feeds itself by being able to embody our passion and feed it, that it's going to naturally keep on giving and supporting us to be able to be imagining new worlds and creating better ones.
Beautiful. Um, how can we find you, Isla? Can you give us a social media link or something that people can look further into your work?
Yeah, thank you, Angie. Instagram, I'm fairly active on, and that's at Isla J Macleod. Or my website, islamacleod.com, has got any events that I'm offering coming up, and also explains all the different ways you can work with me. You can also sign up to my newsletter on my website, which goes out every 6 weeks. So you can get a little bit of a blog and an update on my events there.
Wonderful. It's been great to have this circle with you. Absolutely lovely. So thank you for being my guest.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Angie. We'll have to get around a fire one day soon.
Absolutely. That would be just perfect.